no intro, no outro, just real talk. If you have kids, dexterity. 2-player simultaneous via link cable, not great for adults, not great for middle-aged intellectuals, but the kids would love it. And certainly a hidden gem, a title that has become unknown. Quirk, by contrast, every single one of you in this house, if you clicked on this video, you already know Quirk. Great for kids. Kids, grandkids, whatever you got, whatever you can't get rid of. Now, and for the remainder of the video, we switch to games for mean old overeducated men like myself. Centipede. Centipede. What would you say if I told you that the greatest version of Centipede of all time was on the Game Boy Color? Some of you would be skeptical because, after all, it can't possibly have a trackball. True, true. But what it does have is 2-player simultaneous action, either co-op or competitive, via the link cable. Oh, we're really getting adults only over 18 now. Yeah, that's right. The greatest version of Killer Instinct, in my biased opinion. This is better than the arcade. I would rather play the black and white Game Boy game, also with an absolutely wonderful soundtrack, let me add. So you have to be able to appreciate the distinctive charm of a black and white 8-bit version of Killer Instinct. But boy, this has got it in spades. And all of these games you will see around now in 2024 and 2025 and the years to come for maybe $5. Great example, Nintendo World Cup, also available in Japan with a significantly different name, but the same game. I've bought 3 copies of this so far. I might buy a 4th and a 5th because you see it for $2. Like, it's not even $10, it's not even $5, and you will find it that way too. Is this the best version of the game? It's the best version of the game on the Game Boy. And again, 2-player co-op via link cable. A delightful, bizarre, and slightly surreal, really slightly satirical sports game. How about this? Seamus. Do you know Seamus? No, not Samus, but Seamus. Legendary on the VIC-20, Commodore 64, all those old computers. But the final version of the game, strangely Game Boy Color, maybe you can find it for $2. Maybe somebody will pay you $10 to take it off your hands. A really interesting chapter of video game history that you should pick up. Hey, Blades of Steel, famous but overrated on the Famicom, on the Nintendo Entertainment System. In fact, the best version of that game, one of the most enjoyable 2-player link cable sports games, on the black and white Game Boy. Bo Jackson. You have to be born at the right time to remember the short-lived fame of Bo Jackson, but he had a video game on the black and white Game Boy, and I own 2 copies of it for all the right reasons. If you grew up with 8-bit sports games, this is one of the few that is still enjoyable to this day, with truly stick figure graphics. It may be complained that the characters in the game don't look like the cover art. Were you like that with a kid? Did you ever complain to your parents, Mom, the character in the game doesn't look like the cover? Yeah, well, lower your expectations, kid. Puyo Puyo 2, Japanese exclusive link cable 2-player. Not even a question. Not even a question. Not even optional. Okay, and this one is the exact opposite. Revenge of the Gator, I actually only endorse this as a 1-player game. This is really kind of like an anti-endorsement. The 2-player mode is tragically terrible. Now that one I can't say is a hidden gem. That's maybe a little bit overhyped today. Remember this? Malibu Beach Volleyball. In this case, you want to make sure you get the American version and not the Japanese version. There is a crucial difference in gameplay that makes the Japanese version much, much, much harder. And if you're trying it out on an emulator, you might not be sure which version you're playing if you're playing a ROM off an emulator. 2-player via link cable. This is one of those games that has a skill floor that you have to deal with, more than a skill ceiling. But the level of skill required is less than, for example, Game Boy I was going to say Game Boy Tetris. Game Boy Tennis. You do not have to work quite as hard to make this playable. Okay, Chase HQ. I wish I could tell you this was the definitive edition of Chase HQ. It's not. This is not better than the arcade original, but I've always been fascinated by this process of taking quite a complex and baroque game and stripping it down to the essential elements. And this has a lot of distinctive charm. There is a sequel to this on the Game Boy. I do not recommend the sequel, whereas I do recommend this. The music is some of the best you'll ever hear. There's not enough of it. It is repetitious. This is true of all video games, including Pac-Man. I already did a separate video on this. Black and white Game Boy Pac-Man, worth owning 2 copies of for the unique 2-player mode via link cable. Wave Race for the Game Boy, not the Nintendo 64. Is it really worth owning? It's worth owning if you don't know about Super RC Pro-Am. This is not just the greatest game in this series of games, which is better known and somewhat overhyped on the NES and Famicom. Exists on some 16-bit platforms too, by the way. It's not just the best of that series of games made by that programming team. It is the single greatest game in its genre. Is it worth playing one player alone? Only if you're a small child. But as a fully grown adult, 2-player mode via link cable completely justifies spending upwards of $20 to have 2 copies. No intro, no outro, just real talk.